the most powerful person in the world, Russian President Vladimir Putin. Vladimir Putin has been ruling Russia since 1999. In that time he's shaped the country into an authoritarian and militaristic society. He successfully invaded two of Russia's neighbors and strengthened ties with Syria and Iran. He's intent on pushing back against the Western order and appears to be working. Vladimir Putin, 22 years in power, considered as one of the most powerful person in the world. But who is Vladimir Putin? And how he became so powerful, and how he became a president of Russia, from spy to president. Before we start, if you haven't subscribed to our channel, then do subscribe and click the notification bell so you can keep up to Kuyanin's amazing stories videos. Early career: Putin studied law at Leningrad State University, where his tutor was Anatoly Sobchak, later one of the leading reform politicians of the Perestroika period. Putin served 15 years as a foreign intelligence officer for the KGB, Committee for State Security, including 6 years in Dresden, East Germany. In 1990 he retired from active KGB service with the rank of lieutenant colonel and returned to Russia to become pro-rector of Leningrad State University with responsibility for the institution's external relations. Soon afterward Putin became an advisor to Sobchak, the first democratically elected mayor of St. Petersburg. He quickly won Sobchak's confidence and became known for his ability to get things done. By 1994, he had risen to the post of first deputy mayor. In 1996 Putin moved to Moscow, where he joined the presidential staff as deputy to Pavel Borodin, the Kremlin's chief administrator. Putin grew close to fellow Leningrader Anatoly Chubais and moved up in administrative positions. In July 1998 President Boris Yeltsin made Putin director of the Federal Security Service (FSB), the KGB's domestic successor, and shortly thereafter he became secretary of the influential Security Council. Yeltsin, who was searching for an heir to assume his mantle, appointed Putin prime minister in 1999. Although he was virtually unknown, Putin's public approval ratings soared when he launched a well-organized military operation against secessionist rebels in Chechnya. Wearied by years of Yeltsin's erratic behavior, the Russian public appreciated Putin's coolness and decisiveness under pressure. Putin's support for a new electoral bloc, Unity, ensured its success in the December parliamentary elections. First and second terms as president of Russia. On December 31, 1999, Yeltsin unexpectedly announced his resignation and named Putin acting president. Promising to rebuild a weakened Russia, the austere and reserved Putin easily won the March 2000 elections with about 53% of the vote. As president, he sought to end corruption and create a strongly regulated market economy. Putin quickly reasserted control over Russia's 89 regions and republics, dividing them into 7 new federal districts, each headed by a representative appointed by the president. He also removed the right of regional governors to sit in the Federation Council, the upper house of the Russian parliament. Putin moved to reduce the power of Russia's unpopular financiers and media tycoons, the so-called oligarchs, by closing several media outlets and launching criminal proceedings against numerous leading figures. He faced a difficult situation in Chechnya, particularly from rebels who staged terrorist attacks in Moscow and guerrilla attacks on Russian troops from the region's mountains. In 2002 Putin declared the military campaign over, but casualties remained high. Putin strongly objected to U.S. President George W. Bush's decision in 2001 to abandon the 1972 anti-ballistic missile treaty. In response to the September 11 attacks on the United States in 2001, he pledged Russia's assistance and cooperation in the U.S.-led campaign against terrorists and their allies, offering the use of Russia's airspace for humanitarian deliveries and help in search and rescue operations. Nevertheless, Putin joined German Chancellor Gerhard Schroeder and French press Jacques Chirac in 2002-03 to oppose US and British plans to use force to oust Saddam Hussein's government in Iraq. Overseeing an economy that enjoyed growth after a prolonged recession in the 1990s, Putin was easily re-elected in March 2004. In parliamentary elections in December 2007, Putin's party, United Russia, won an overwhelming majority of seats. Though the fairness of the elections was questioned by international observers and by the Communist Party of the Russian Federation, the results nonetheless affirmed Putin's power. With a constitutional provision forcing Putin to step down in 2008, he chose Dmitry Medvedev as his successor. Putin as prime minister. Soon after Medvedev won the March 2008 presidential election by a landslide, Putin announced that he had accepted the position of chairman of the United Russia Party. Confirming widespread expectations, Medvedev nominated Putin as the country's prime minister within hours of taking office on May 7, 2008. Russia's parliament confirmed the appointment the following day. Although Medvedev grew more assertive as his term progressed, Putin was still regarded as the main power within the Kremlin. While some speculated that Medvedev might run for a second term, he announced in September 2011 that he and Putin would, pending a united Russia victory at the polls, trade positions. Widespread irregularities in parliamentary elections in December 2011 triggered a wave of popular protest, and Putin faced a surprisingly strong opposition movement in the presidential race. On March 4, 2012, however, Putin was elected to a third term as Russia's president. In advance of his inauguration, Putin resigned as United Russia chairman, handing control of the party to Medvedev. He was inaugurated as president on May 7, 2012, and one of his first acts upon assuming office was to nominate Medvedev to serve as prime minister. Third presidential term of Vladimir Putin. Putin's first year back in office as president was characterized by a largely successful effort to stifle the protest movement. Opposition leaders were jailed, and non-governmental organizations that received funding from abroad were labeled as foreign agents. Tensions with the United States flared in June 2013, when U.S. National Security Agency, NSA, contractor Edward Snowden sought refuge in Russia after revealing the existence of a number of secret NSA programs. Snowden was allowed to remain in Russia on the condition that, in the words of Putin, he stop bringing harm to our American partners. After chemical weapons attacks outside Damascus in August 2013, the U.S. made the case for military intervention in the Syrian civil war. In an editorial published in the New York Times, Putin urged restraint, and U.S. and Russian officials brokered a deal whereby Syria's chemical weapons supply would be destroyed. Putin commemorated the 20th anniversary of the adoption of the post-Soviet constitution in December 2013, by ordering the release of some 25,000 individuals from Russian prisons. In a separate move, he granted a pardon to Mikhail Khodorkovsky, the former head of the Yukos oil conglomerate, who had been imprisoned for more than a decade on charges that many outside Russia claimed were politically motivated. The Ukraine conflict and Syrian intervention. In February 2014, when the government of Ukrainian President Viktor Yanukovych was overthrown after months of sustained protests, Yanukovych fled to Russia. Refusing to recognize the interim government in Kiev as legitimate, Putin requested parliamentary approval to dispatch troops to Ukraine to safeguard Russian interests. By early March 2014, Russian troops and pro-Russian paramilitary groups had effectively taken control of Crimea, a Ukrainian autonomous republic whose population was predominantly ethnic Russian. In a popular referendum held on March 16, residents of the Crimea voted to join Russia, and Western governments introduced a series of travel bans and asset freezes against members of Putin's inner circle. On March 18, Putin, stating that the Crimea had always been part of Russia, signed a treaty incorporating the peninsula into the Russian Federation. Over subsequent days, still more of Putin's political allies were targeted with economic sanctions by the US and the EU. After ratification of the treaty by both houses of the Russian parliament, on March 21, Putin signed legislation that formalized the Russian annexation of Crimea. In April 2014, groups of unidentified gunmen outfitted with Russian equipment seized government buildings throughout southeastern Ukraine, sparking an armed conflict with the government in Kiev. Putin referred to the region as Novorossiya, New Russia, evoking claims from the imperial era. And, although all signs pointed to direct Russian involvement in the insurgency, Putin steadfastly denied having a hand in the fighting. On July 17, 2014, Malaysia Airlines flight MH17, carrying 298 people, crashed in eastern Ukraine, and overwhelming evidence indicated that it had been shot down by a Russian-made surface-to-air missile fired from rebel-controlled territory. Western countries responded by tightening the sanctions regime, and those measures, combined with plummeting oil prices, sent the Russian economy into a tailspin. The North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, estimated that more than 1,000 Russian troops were actively fighting inside Ukraine when Russian and Ukrainian leaders met for ceasefire talks in Minsk, Belarus, on September 5. The ceasefire slowed, but did not stop, the violence, and pro-Russian rebels spent the next several months pushing back Ukrainian government forces. On February 12, 2015, Putin met with other world leaders in Minsk to approve a 12-point peace plan aimed at ending the fighting in Ukraine. Although fighting slowed for a period, the conflict picked up again in the spring, and by September 2015 the United Nations, UN, estimated that some 8,000 people had been killed and 1.5 million had been displaced as a result of the fighting. On September 28, 2015, in an address before the UN General Assembly, Putin presented his vision of Russia as a world power, capable of projecting its influence abroad, while painting the United States and NATO as threats to global security. 2 days later, Russia became an active participant in the Syrian civil war, when Russian aircraft struck targets near the cities of Homs and Hama. Although Russian defense officials stated that the airstrikes were intended to target troops and material belonging to the Islamic State in Iraq and the Levant, the actual focus of the attacks seemed to have been on opponents of Syrian president and Russian ally Bashar al-Assad. Silencing critics and actions in the West. On February 27, 2015, opposition leader Boris Nemtsov was gunned down within sight of the Kremlin, just days after he had spoken out against Russian intervention in Ukraine. Nemtsov was only the latest Putin critic to be assassinated or to die under suspicious circumstances. In January 2016, a British public inquiry officially implicated Putin in the 2006 murder of former Federal Security Service (FSB), the successor to the KGB, officer Alexander Litvinenko. Litvinenko, who had spoken out against Russian government ties to organized crime both before and after his defection to the United Kingdom, was poisoned with polonium-210 while drinking tea in a London hotel bar. Britain ordered the extradition of the two men accused of carrying out the assassination, but both denied involvement and one, Andrei Lugovoy, had since been elected to the Duma and enjoyed parliamentary immunity from prosecution. Alexei Navalny, an opposition activist who had first achieved prominence as a leader of the 2011 protest movement, was repeatedly imprisoned on what supporters characterized as politically motivated charges. Navalny finished second in the Moscow mayoral race in 2013, but his Progress Party was shut out of subsequent elections on procedural grounds. In the September 2016 legislative election, voter turnout was just 47.8%, the lowest since the collapse of the Soviet Union. Voter apathy was attributed to Putin's steady implementation of so-called managed democracy, a system whereby the basic structures and procedures of democracy were maintained, but the outcome of elections was largely predetermined. Putin's United Russia Party claimed victory, but election observers documented numerous irregularities, including instances of ballot stuffing and repeat voting. Navalny's party was prohibited from fielding any candidates because of its registration status, and Nemtsov's Parnas received less than 1% of the vote. By 2016, Putin's involvement had shifted the balance in power in Syria, and evidence emerged that Russia was conducting a wide-ranging hybrid warfare campaign intended to undermine the power and legitimacy of Western democracies. Many of the attacks blurred the line between cyber warfare and cybercrime, while others recalled the direct Soviet interventionism of the Cold War era. Russian fighter jets routinely violated NATO airspace in the Baltic, and a pair of sophisticated cyber attacks on the Ukrainian power grid plunged hundreds of thousands of people into darkness. Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko reported that his country had been subjected to more than 6,000 cyber intrusions over a 2-month period, with virtually every sector of Ukrainian society being targeted. Poroshenko stated that Ukrainian investigators had linked the cyber war campaign to Russian security services. In Montenegro, where the pro-Western government was preparing for accession to NATO, authorities narrowly averted a plot to assassinate Montenegrin Prime Minister Milo Djukanovic and install a pro-Russian government. Montenegrin prosecutors uncovered a conspiracy that linked nationalist Serbs, pro-Russian fighters in eastern Ukraine, and, allegedly, a pair of Russian intelligence agents who had orchestrated the planned coup. In the months prior to the 2016 U.S. presidential election, a series of high-profile hacking attacks targeted the Democratic Party and its presidential nominee Hillary Clinton. Computer security experts tied these attacks to Russian intelligence services, and in July 2016 thousands of private emails were published by WikiLeaks. Within days, the U.S. Federal Bureau of Investigation opened a probe into Russian efforts to influence the presidential election. It was later revealed that this investigation was also examining possible connections between those efforts and the campaign of Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump. Trump joked that Russia had released the hacked emails because Putin likes me, and later invited Russia to find Clinton's 30,000 emails that are missing. In spite of these statements, Trump repeatedly dismissed the possibility that Putin was attempting to sway the election in his favor. After Trump's stunning victory in November 2016, renewed attention was focused on the cyber attacks and possible collusion between Trump's campaign team and Russia. U.S. intelligence agencies concluded that Putin had ordered a multi-pronged campaign to influence the election and undermine faith in American democratic systems. U.S. President Barack Obama imposed economic sanctions on Russian intelligence services and expelled dozens of suspected Russian operatives, but President-elect Trump continued to reject the conclusions of U.S. intelligence agencies. Trump took office in January 2017 and additional investigations were opened by the U.S. Congress to examine the nature and extent of Russian meddling in the presidential election. For his part, Putin denied the existence of any campaign to influence foreign elections. In May 2017, however, another cyber attack was attributed to Fancy Bear, the Russian government-linked group that had carried out the hack on the Democratic Party. France was holding the second round of its presidential election, and the finalists were centrist Emmanuel Macron and far-right National Front candidate Marine Le Pen. Le Pen had previously received financial support from a bank that had ties to the Kremlin, and she vowed to push for the end of the sanctions regime that had been enacted after Russia's annexation of Crimea. Just hours before a media blackout on campaign-related news coverage went into effect. A massive trove of internal communications, dubbed Macron leaks, surfaced on the internet. This effort came to naught, as Macron captured nearly twice as many votes as Le Pen and became president of France. Putin's foreign moves appeared to produce significant dividends at home, as his popular approval rating consistently remained above 80% in spite of Russia's sluggish economy and endemic government corruption. Low oil prices and Western sanctions compounded an already grim financial outlook as foreign investors remained reluctant to put their capital at risk in a land where personal ties to Putin were seen as more important than the rule of law, even after Russia emerged from 7 consecutive quarters of recession. Both wages and consumer spending remained stagnant in 2017. These and other domestic problems seemed to do little to dent Putin's image. Among those expressing concern for such issues in opinion polls, blame was most often affixed to Putin's prime minister, Dmitry Medvedev. As an 2018 presidential election approached, it seemed all but certain that Putin would win a 4th presidential term by a wide margin. Navalny, the face of the opposition, was barred from running, and the communist candidate, Pavel Grudinin, faced incessant criticism from the state-run media. 2 weeks before the election, Putin became the focus of a major international incident when Sergei Skripal, a former Russian intelligence officer who was convicted of spying for Britain only to be released to the United Kingdom, as part of a prisoner swap, was found unconscious with his daughter in Salisbury, England. Investigators alleged that the pair had been exposed to a Novichok, a complex nerve agent developed by the Soviets. British officials accused Putin of having ordered the attack, and British Prime Minister Theresa May expelled nearly 24 Russian intelligence operatives who had been working in Britain, under diplomatic cover. The diplomatic row had not abated when Russians went to the polls on March 18, 2018. The date was, not coincidentally, the 4th anniversary of Russia's forcible annexation of the Ukrainian Autonomous Republic of Crimea, an event that marked a spike in Putin's domestic popularity. As expected, Putin claimed an overwhelming majority of the vote in an election that independent monitoring agency Golos characterized as being rife with irregularities. Putin had wished for a higher turnout than in his 2012 election victory, and ballot stuffing was observed in numerous locations. Putin's campaign characterized the result as an incredible victory. On July 16, 2018, fresh from the success of Russia's well-received hosting of the World Cup Football Championship, Putin held a summit meeting in Helsinki with Trump. The two had conducted discussions at the Group of 20 (G20) Summit in Hamburg, Germany, and the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Gathering in Da Nang, Vietnam, in 2017, but the encounter in Finland marked their first formal one-on-one meeting. It came at the end of Trump's trip to Europe, in which he had ruffled relations with the United States' traditional European allies. Although some observers questioned whether Trump would be able to hold his own in discussions with a counterpart as seasoned and cagey as Putin, Trump said that he thought his meeting with Putin would be the easiest of his trip. After Putin kept Trump waiting by arriving late, the two met alone, with only translators present, for some 2 hours and then more briefly in the presence of advisors. In the press conference that followed, Putin once again denied any Russian interference in the 2016 US presidential election. Trump then sent shockwaves when, in response to a reporter's question, he indicated that he trusted Putin's denial more than the conclusions of his own intelligence organizations, which only days earlier had resulted in the U.S. Department of Justice's indictment of 12 Russian intelligence agents for their meddling in the election. Moreover, given the opportunity to condemn transgressive Russian actions, Trump instead cast blame on the United States for its strained relationship with Russia. Trump also warmed to Putin's offer to allow U.S. investigators to interview the Russian agents, in return for Russian access to Americans of interest in Russian investigations. Asked by an American reporter if he had favored Trump in the election, Putin said that he had, because of Trump's expressed desire for better relations with Russia. When questioned about whether Russia had compromising information on Trump, Putin pointed to the St. Petersburg Economic Forum and talked about the impossibility of obtaining compromising material on each of the more than 500 high-ranking, high-level American businessmen said to have attended the conference. He also said that he had been unaware of Trump's presence in Moscow during an earlier visit. Some press accounts of his answer, however, pointed out that Putin did not explicitly deny having Trump-related compromise. The Russian press trumpeted the summit as a huge success for Putin. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov described the outcome of the summit as better than super. The response in the United States was mostly shock, and a number of Republicans joined Democrats in strongly condemning Trump's performance. Although Russia remained something of a pariah on the global stage, its athletes were barred from international competition due to a massive state-sponsored doping scheme. It was suspended indefinitely from the G8, and it was the target of a raft of economic sanctions. Putin's personal stature was undiminished. With Britain struggling to conclude an exit deal with the European Union, German Chancellor Angela Merkel in the twilight of her tenure as de facto leader of Europe, and governments in Poland and Hungary exhibiting increasingly authoritarian practices, Putin faced a West that seemed unable to find its direction. Against this backdrop, he boasted of a robust expansion of Russian military power, particularly in the field of hypersonic weapons. Speaking about the historic arms race between the US and the Soviet Union, in December 2019 Putin remarked, "Today, we have a situation that is unique in modern history. They're trying to catch up to us." In January 2020 Putin announced his intention to modify the Russian constitution in a way that would scrap term limits for presidents, paving the way for him to remain in office indefinitely. Medvedev promptly resigned as prime minister, stating that a new government would give Putin the opportunity to make the decisions he needs to make. The proposed constitutional changes were speedily approved by the Russian legislature, but Putin scheduled a national referendum on the matter, a move that critics described as little more than political theater. That vote was originally scheduled for April, but it was postponed until July due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Unsurprisingly, the result was an overwhelming affirmation of Putin's agenda. But opposition groups noted that there was no independent monitoring of the election process. On August 20, Navalny became seriously ill on a flight from the Siberian city of Tomsk, and tests later confirmed that he had been exposed to Novichok. Navalny was flown to Germany to recover, and the following month opposition candidates performed surprisingly well in local elections, held in the area where Navalny had been campaigning. The Kremlin denied involvement in the poisoning, but such protestations had become increasingly implausible, as the attack on Navalny represented only the most recent in a long series of attempts on the lives of Putin's critics. That's all for today. If you like this video, don't forget to subscribe and click the notification bell for more updates. Thanks for watching.